Hey everybody, welcome back to another video in our Unity VR development series. Before we get started coding, I'm going to go ahead and show you what we're going to be making today. And for this tutorial, you should be at least a little familiar with Unity as a platform, and ideally you should watch our first video about VR and Unity to get kind of the basics down. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into what we're going to be making. Last video we made a color picker with Unity style UI elements. This time we're going to be doing a similar thing, a color picker with the Vive controller and the touchpad specifically. So we're going to learn about how to interpret controller input from the Vive and the VR, and then how to kind of do something with that in Unity. So I'm going to dive into the headset here. You can see we've got this cube kind of like last time, and then on the controller we've got this color picker that's like a circle. So what happens when you touch the pad, it'll change the color. Then if you squeeze the trigger and touch the pad up and down, you'll be able to lighten or darken the circle that you're picking colors from. And then you can like get the darker colors in there like that, almost black. So with that out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and get started in a new project. I would suggest cloning our repository from GitHub. It's gonna have all the examples for this series in that. And then that'll kind of make things easier as we go, because this specific tutorial is going to have some assets that might be easier if you just copy those from our thing. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get in here. You'll see that I do not have a totally empty scene right now. And so last time we explained how VRTK has these examples in it. So I'm in actually one of their example scenes just to get started here. You can find that in VRTK examples, and it's actually the second example right here. So I just clone that and put it in my assets, open that up. Okay, so this is going to give us a nice starting point for a VR scene. So a couple of things we need to think about. We've already got the controllers in here. We've got those linked up to Steam VR through VRTK. So now what are we going to do? We are going to make a UI element on top of, let's just say for now, the right controller, and that's going to be the default controller if you only have one on. So in here in this VRTK, we're going to go into the right controller, and then we're going to, so we've got this controller events listener. We're going to go ahead and remove that off of here as the component, and that basically what that is from the example is just going to tell you whenever you press different buttons, you're going to get like callbacks in a script, and then you can like log events there, but we don't really care about that for now. If you're interested in learning how to set up the other events for buttons on the controllers, take a look at that because it's pretty helpful. So in this right controller, we're going to add a object as a child, and this is going to hold the canvas object that we put our color picker UI on. Now this is going to be a little confusing. We need to set some fairly arbitrary values here for the position of this to get it to line up in the right position. So you can just copy those here. Got the Y. I'm just going to paste in this Z, and then the X rotation. Okay, and you'll just have to trust me that this is going to place it in the right position for this. Okay, so then in this canvas holder, we're going to add a UI canvas. Okay, now we're gonna have to change this to world space because it's a VR canvas. And then we're gonna change the scaling of this. We need it to just be 1 by 1. You'll see why in a little bit. The position should just be at 0. And then need to remove the rotation. And the scale is going to be really small, so it fits on the touchpad. Kind of arbitrary values, but you'll see it work in a minute. Okay. So, if I've done everything correctly, if we launch this, we should see the controller there. And then if we expand this out right, we've got the canvas holder. And yeah, that's exactly where we want it. Right on that touchpad there. Cool. So in the canvas, we're going to have two things. We're going to create a color wheel object to hold the hue and saturation color picker, and then we'll have that black circle that's going to be the overlay, so we can adjust the lightness and darkness. So we'll just create, actually we need empty objects. We need images, that's right. Okay, so we need 2 images. Just call it color wheel, duplicate that, and we'll do black wheel. Okay, so now we've got this color wheel, and we're going to need to pick our source image. Let's see if I have it in here. Yep, okay. So for that color wheel, just go over to the image component and pick the source image as color wheel. So if you clone the repository, it's going to include these images in there, and then you can just use those. Then for the black wheel, same thing, black wheel. All right, so now what it's going to look like if we run it is, as you can imagine, well, the scaling's all messed up. So we've got this giant black circle. So what we actually need to do is match the width and the height of both of these to the width and height of our canvas. And so we just set it to 1. And then what we're going to do is change the black wheel's alpha color to be 0 for now. So now when we run it, it's going to look a lot nicer. We got this this color picker now. You can still see the indicator there. All right, so that's good. Now we're going to need to make a script. So we'll do C#. Let's say color picker wheel. Okay, now we're going to assign this onto the right controller as a component. Color picker wheel. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and edit this. So that'll come up. Okay, now first things first, let's go ahead and add a public variable for the color cube. There, the cube that's going to change colors. So so we can reference that later on in the script. Just make that a game object called color cube. Okay. Now we're going to need to store some variables for the hue, saturation, and value. So what we're going to be working with is kind of a color model called HSV, hue, saturation, value. And then we're going to have to convert that into RGB so we can just load it as a color onto the renderer of the cube. So we've got hue, saturation, value. Hue is the color, saturation is the amount of color, and then value is the brightness. So let's make just private floats for each of those. And then we can go ahead and initialize the value to be a 1. And that's just because we're going to have it start off at the brightest it can be, just the base hue and saturation colors in a picker. So then we're going to also need just a private reference to the black dot wheel object. Just call it black wheel. Okay. Now, here's where we get to the fun stuff. So first of all, we need to make sure that we can access the controller events from the VRTK library. So those are attached right here. So just as a safety check, we're going to make sure that we actually have that component. So we need to make sure that get component VRTK. Oh, also we need to make sure we're using the VRTK import there. Okay, then we can access the VRTK variables. So we've got get component VRTK controller events. So if it's null, we're going to just output a message in our console. Say need component. And then we'll return out of here. Okay, so that'll make sure that nothing will go too crazy if we don't actually have that component attached. Okay, so then if that's all good, we're going to go ahead and assign the black wheel object. So let's go back to Unity. So we can see in the right controller, we put it under canvas holder, canvas, black wheel. You could make this as a public variable as well, but I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do transform dot find, and then the path. So it's canvas holder, canvas, black wheel, I think. we'll see an error if not, and then dot game object. Okay, so now we need to listen for the touchpad changed event. So we can do that through the VRTK controller events component. So we can say get component. We'll just copy this. Dot touchpad axis changed plus equals, so we'll assign the event to a new controller interaction event handler, and then we'll put in what our method is called. So we'll call it do touchpad axis changed. All right, so then we need to create this as a method, and then that's going to receive a couple of parameters here, sender, and then controller interaction event args e. And that's what the VRTK library is going to send us about this event. So let's start off simple. So we'll just do the hue and saturation, and then worry about the value later on. So we're going to go ahead and call, let's make another method here. Call it changed hue saturation. And what we're going to pass in is a vector2 for the position on the touchpad that you're currently touching. Just call it touchpad axis. And then we're going to do a float for the angle at which you're touching it. All right, and then in here we'll just call that method and pass it in the appropriate arguments here. So it's going to be e.touchpad axis and then e.touchpad angle. Okay. Oh, forgot the void there. That should fix that error. Okay, now in here we're going to basically need to figure out how our touches on the touchpad will map to this this color wheel. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of math. Bear with me. I'll try and explain it as well as I can. Okay, so first of all, one thing, the angle, touchpad angle here that VRTK is going to give us for this event is going to be set to be, if you imagine the unit circle, it's not at the right side. It's going to give it to us as if it were at 90 degrees, so the very top. And the way that Unity is going to set the convert the HSV color to RGB, we need it to be on the right side. So we're just going to go ahead and normalize that angle, and that's going to be pretty simple here. So we'll just make a new normal angle equals touchpad angle minus 90. And then if that flows past 0, we'll just do okay, there we go. So that'll subtract 90 from it, and then we'll be back to starting at the right side. Okay, so now given this information, let's go ahead and log some of it and then jump into the player and see if it's working. So let's log, just say this method, axis, then we'll do the touchpad axis, and then angle, normal. All right, so we'll hop back into Unity, run it, see what happens. So we've got that same touchpad with the UI before, so we can see right there we've got our logs. So you can see, okay, when we touch the top, that normally would be at 0 or 360, but since we normalized it, 0 is going to be right here. And then it's going to go around like that. And then you can see as we go to the right axis, the X component is 1, and then Y is about 0. And then if you go up here, it's 1 or 0, 1. So that makes sense. Now let's hop back into the code and keep going. So after this the issue, I'll try and explain the issue here. So we want to be able to map that position to what color we want. Now, when VRTK gives us the vector 2 for like this position, you'll see it's 0.6, 0.7. But really, we want this to be controlling the saturation. So as in the center, saturation is 0. As you go around in the angle, the hue changes based on the degrees. And then as you go towards the edge, the saturation increases. So anytime it's at the very edge of the circle, it has a saturation of 1, but the position that we're getting from the axis is not 1 here. It's at the edge of the circle, but the box that it would be giving the axis in is a square, not a circle. So at here, we don't know that we're actually given this axis. We need to know that we're at the edge of the circle. So we basically have to translate these vector coordinates into the one that you're actually at. So we're going to use a little bit of trigonometry here. So first we're going to convert the angle into radians. Normal angle pi 180. Convert that into radians, and then we're going to need to get the max x and max y values that it could be at, the edge of the circle could be at, based on like the unit circle. So that's pretty simple. We're going to do float max x equals mathf dot cosine of rads. So if you imagine unit circle, given your angle t that we have based on the angle of the touchpad, you get the x and y coordinates at the edge of the circle from cosine of t and sine of t. So we're going to find the max x and max y using that. So we're going to do math.cosine of rads to get the max x value. Similarly, we'll do max y equals mathf dot sine of rads. Okay, so now given those max values, we're going to just shortcut our variables here to the current values. Cur x, that's going to be touchpad axis dot x, and then we'll get the current y with touchpad axis dot y. Now we need to know, now we have the current x's and y's and the max x's and y's, so we're going to calculate the percentage towards the max based on the current. So we're going to calculate the percent x equals the absolute value in case we're at the other quadrants, mathf dot absolute of cur x divided by max x, and then the same thing for the y. So this will give us the percent towards the edge in each direction. Okay, so then we can actually calculate the hue really easily. So remember, we assigned the hue, and we have a variable for the hue up here. So we can assign that this dot hue equals normal angle divided by 360 f. The reason we want to do this is to make it between 0 and 1 instead of between 0 and 360, just for when we pass it into the next method. So we'll do the saturation now. So the saturation, we've got the percentages, so we're just going to average the percentages. Okay, so now we can, did I spell something wrong? It seems to be giving me an error here, maybe. Yeah. I'm stupid. Need to put an equal sign. Okay, so now we've got hue and saturation. We can just log those really quick. I'll comment out this log so it's easier to see. Okay, we'll run that. and then see what we've got. Alright, so now we've got the hue first and the saturation. So the hue is going to be between 0 and 1. So you can see at here it's 1 or 0 for red. Then as you go around, it's going to go up to 1 for like pink, magenta. And then you've got the hue, the saturation at the middle is 0-ish. Then towards the edge, it goes to 1. Okay, so we're all good so far. Now we're going to create a new method called update color. No arguments. And this is going to change the color on the renderer of that cube. So first we're going to make the color. Luckily, Unity has a built-in function to convert from HSV to RGB, so we don't have to worry about that. So it's in the color class. I'm just forgetting these equal signs. Okay, color.hsv to RGB with this.hue, this.saturation, and this.value. So we've got the color. Now we can assign it to that cube. Color cube dot get components. We want the renderer dot material dot color equals color. So, provided we've done everything right, this should work to an extent. So, we're going to go ahead and touch this. Where's the cube? Where is the cube? I don't think, oh yeah, there it is. Oh, I never added the cube in. Okay, so we'll stop that. Getting too far ahead of ourselves. So we're going to add this cube and just kind of position it wherever. And then we have to make sure that we assign it to that script. It's cube 1. Okay. So now there's the cube. And as we touch, it is not doing anything. Let's find out why. We're not calling update color. Simple enough. Okay. Now it should definitely work. All right. Look at that. So now it's going to update the color. So you can see whitish as we go out here, red, yellow, all the way around the rainbow. It's looking good, pretty good so far. So let's go ahead and add in the other component of this, which is going to be the value component. So we've already got this black wheel here. So then in here, like I said, we're going to base it off of if you're holding the trigger down to change the value. So in here, we're going to do something pretty simple. If get component VRTK controller events dot trigger pressed. So like you can see here, this component has these events that you can assign and listen for, like touchpad axis change. They've also got like trigger pressed as a function here. So you can listen for that as well. But for this case, we're going to just access this variable called trigger pressed, which is just a Boolean. And like you can see here, this will be true if the trigger is squeezed about halfway in. So I encourage you to go ahead and look through all of this stuff. They've got a bunch of different events for the different buttons on the controller. Pretty good information. So trigger pressed. If it's pressed, we want to call a method that we'll create called changed value. Otherwise, we'll do changed hue saturation. Create that now. And we're actually going to need to take in a vector2. Same as before, touchpad axis. And then we'll pass it in here. And like I mentioned before, we want to change the value based on the vertical touch on the pad. So at the top, it's going to have a value of 1, and at the bottom, it's going to be 0. So in here, we're going to be using the touchpad axis. So we're going to just assign this dot value equals, we're going to add 1 to it because at the bottom it's going to be -1 and the top it'll be 1. So we'll do touchpad axis dot y plus 1 and then divided by 2 to get it between 0 and 1. Okay, and then we're going to just get we need to assign the current color of the black wheel image as a temporary variable and then modify the alpha property. So we can say cur color equals black wheel, which we assigned earlier, dot get component image. We need to also use the Unity engine dot UI import. Then we can do dot image dot color, and then we can change the alpha a equals and then 1 minus this dot value, and then we can reassign that. Okay, so the reason we're doing 1 minus the value here is because we want if we're at the top of the pad, we want the alpha of black wheel to be 0, and at the top of the pad, this dot value is going to be equal to 1. So then we subtract that, and in the opposite direction, if we're at the bottom of the pad, it's going to be 0, and we can do 1 minus 0 is 1. So then it'll be fully opaque. Okay, so then after setting that new color, we're going to call update color again. And we're going to go back into Unity and test this out. Alright, so we can change the color, and then if we squeeze the trigger and move it up and down, we can see that it's changing the get the controller in a good position there. It's changing the opacity of black wheel, and then it's updating color as well. So if we want dark colors, we just go down here, pretty much all black. We got medium dark, just put it in the middle, release the trigger, and then you get the darker colors. And that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So I hope this helped you guys learn how to do controller input in Vive, Unity, VR, VRTK, all that stuff. Stay tuned for more episodes of our Unity VR series, and thanks for watching.